child. Okay? During this time, he establishes a pro-communist organization in New Orleans called the Fair Play for Cuba campaign, which there were people in the United States that thought we were treating Cuba poorly. And there were other organizations around the United States, but there was not one in New Orleans. So Oswald simply starts his own Fair Play for Cuba campaign, makes himself president. He's the only member in New Orleans, and he goes around distributing pro-Cuba pamphlets all along New Orleans. Well, what kind of people do you have down in New Orleans? You have Cubans that have escaped that don't like Cuba. So what's he ends up doing? Getting in an argument, getting in a fight, becoming a novelty. All of a sudden now he's on TV. They like him. He's kind of a weird guy. Radio stations and televisions are interviewing him. He's telling them that he's a Marxist. And he just gets all kinds of attention, which he likes because of the trouble he brews up in New Orleans. Well, in September of 1963, Oswald tells Marina that he plans to go to both Mexico City and hopefully then to Cuba. And according to her testimony to the Warren Commission, he wants her to help him hijack an airplane to fly to Cuba. And she talks him out of it, and instead he decides just to go to Mexico City. Well, about this time, Ruth Paine comes from Texas to visit Marina in New Orleans. On September 23rd, 1963, Marina returns to Dallas with Mrs. Paine. She had recently separated from her husband in New Orleans. Mrs. Paine invited Marina to move in with her in Irving because she was concerned about Marina. Marina was 8 months pregnant and had not been to a prenatal care doctor one time. Had not been one time to have anything. Okay, so...
Sorry for the interruption, teachers. Could you please excuse all those agri-science kids that are going to Westy Ag Day event today at this time? Thank you.
Mrs. Paine just felt like Marina needed some prenatal care, so she took her back to live with her. And it was that point, kiddos, where they would never live together again, ever. Never would live together, ever. Okay? Now, in New Orleans, Oswald actually obtained a tourist card from the Mexican Consulate General in New Orleans, and this was a legitimate visa to take one trip to Mexico for no longer than 15 days. And so we've talked about this before. On September 25th, 63, he collects his $33 unemployment check. He leaves New Orleans for Mexico City. He arrives in Mexico City on September 25th, 1963. He visits both the Cuban and Russian embassies there. His goal was to get a travel visa to either Cuba or back to Russia. He visits the Cuban embassy first. They kind of put him off and say, you know, this is going to take some time. And he gets mad and stomps out. So he goes over to the Russian embassy in Mexico City. And he tries to apply for a passport to get to Russia. They kind of put him off and tell him, hey, this is going to take some time. He storms out, gets mad, and walks out of there as well. Okay? He returns to Texas on October 3rd, 1963 via bus, checks into the Dallas YMCA for shelter, and files a claim for unemployment. Okay? Now, he's back in Texas, right? And we talked about James Hosty. James Hosty knows all this stuff. Remember, he kind of drops the ball, okay? Well, because of the expenses and family issues, Oswald and Marina split up, as I mentioned, when Lee returned to Texas. She lived with Ruth Paine. On October 7th, 1963, he rents a room at 621 North Marsalis Street in the Oak Cliff neighborhood of Dallas, but his landlady gets tired of him and kicks him out after 1 week. On October 14th, he rents a small room at the 1026 North Beckley place, right? The place we're familiar with. But he doesn't rent it under Lee Harvey Oswald. He rents it under O.H. Lee. O.H. Lee. Everybody at the boarding house thinks his name is Mr. Lee. That's what they call him. They don't know his name is Lee Harvey Oswald. They think his name is O.H. Lee. So he's not even honest when he does that. He paid $8 a week for his boarding. That included daily dusting, bed straightening, and trash removal, linen once a week, and towels twice a week. We mentioned that Oswald had a difficult time getting a job in Dallas because he couldn't drive. And remember, Mrs. Paine, I don't remember if I told you this now, but Mrs. Paine, through Lenny Mae Randall, through Buell Frazier, found out that the Texas School Book Depository was hiring. And it was Mrs. Paine that told Lee Harvey Oswald about that. He applies for a job. He interviews with Superintendent Roy Truly, and he's hired at the depository on October 16, 1963. 4 days later, on the 20th, Aubrey Marina Rachel Oswald was born, and now the Oswalds have 2 children. Because Oswald couldn't drive, I don't have to tell you this story, he would take the bus or walk to the depository during the week, and what would he do on Friday afternoons? Ride with Buell Frazier to Mrs. Payne's house until that fateful Friday in November. Now, let's talk about the FBI a little bit, because it's interesting. When President Lyndon Johnson returned to Washington, D.C. after the assassination, he ordered the FBI to take over the investigation in Dallas concerning the assassination. Now, federal law did not really allow the FBI to have jurisdiction over the case, and the Dallas Police Department knew that. And even though FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover demanded that the rifle and other evidence collected by the Dallas police be sent to the FBI crime lab in Washington, D.C., Police Chief Jesse Curry bucked him a little bit and said, "We will only give you that evidence if you return it all within 24 hours, which they did. So, Oswald, you know, as we mentioned, James Hosty was kind of studying Oswald since he returned from Russia and was supposed to be paying attention to him when he returned from New Orleans. Now, think about this a minute. Prior to Kennedy's motorcade through downtown Dallas, here's what the FBI knew about Lee Harvey Oswald. He was in Dallas, he was a practicing Marxist, he had defected to Russia seeking citizenship there, he had married and returned to the United States with a Russian wife, which was very unusual, and he had a job at the Texas School Book Depository. James Hosty knew all this. Well, this fellow right here, Hugh Ainsworth, pretty famous journalist, he worked for the Dallas Morning News, he witnessed the Kennedy assassination, the Oswald arrest, and the Oswald assassination. He met and sat down with FBI Chief J. Gordon Shanklin for an interview. And he asked Shanklin after the assassination, after all this evidence you had on Oswald, not even mentioning the assassination business, remember with the Russian assassination agent? He says to him, why in the world would you not go over to the Texas School Book Depository and interview this man? Okay, this guy was a practicing Marxist. He was in Dallas. He had defected to Russia. He had a Russian wife and came back. He's working at the depository, and you don't go over and question him, knowing that the president's motorcade is going to go right by the Texas School Book Depository? And the answer that Shanklin gave him is they were afraid that if they went and talked to Oswald at the Texas School Book Depository, that he would lose his job. You know what Ainsworth's reply was? Well, the president sure lost his, didn't he? That was his response. Well, to tell you the truth, after this mess, I might have told you this before, but Hosty was ordered by Shanklin to destroy all the files that he had on Oswald after the president was assassinated. He actually burnt those files in the toilet at the FBI building in Dallas. All of them were destroyed. All of those files were destroyed because they were scared to death on the heat they were going to take over them. Okay? Now, let's kind of talk about this a little bit before we have our cake. So what is the story with Lee Harvey Oswald? What's the story with Lee Harvey Oswald? Okay, what did he do? Did he shoot the president or not? I believe clearly that he shot the president of the United States without doubt. I don't think anybody else shot him. I don't think he had any help in shooting him. Was he part of a conspiracy? Okay, was he part of a conspiracy? I don't know. Okay, I'm pretty confident he shot him. But what was his plan? Did he have a plan to go? Did he have a plan to go somewhere? Think about that. We've talked about this. What did he do after the assassination? Okay? Okay, he had a bus ticket. Okay, and he was 2 blocks away from a bus transfer that was going to take him to the Greyhound bus station where he, remember, first caught the cab. Now, evidently, when he got to that bus station, he was going to go somewhere else, right? Well, if you do the research, how much money did he have with him? $13.87, which ironically was the exact amount that he needed to take a bus from the Greyhound bus station to Brownsville, Texas. Anybody know where that's at? It's right on the border. Yeah, it's right on the border. So my speculation is this, and it was mentioned kind of briefly in the video. Where has he been and tried to go before? He's been to Mexico City. Where did he try to go? Cuba, and he tried to go to Russia. And they said, get out of here. So what does he do? Think about, he tries to kill Edwin Walker, who might be the most hated man in Cuba and Russia because of his views. What's that? Well, here we go. So my feeling is the first plan was to kill Walker and do the same thing. But he fails to kill Walker. So then he sets his sight on the president, shoots the president. He gets to Brownsville, Texas. He's got all the means to get there. He's got everything planned. He's left his wedding ring and all of his money with his wife. He knows he's not coming back. He takes $13.87, which is just exactly what you need to get to Brownsville, Texas. He's going to go back to those embassies and he's going to say, what could I do more to prove my loyalty to communism? I shot the President of the United States. What's that? Absolutely, they would have thought he was crazier than hell. But that wasn't his thinking. And I think the whole thing here that makes sense is the Walker assassination attempt. If he's successful there and doesn't get caught, I think he does the same thing. He goes to Brownsville, Texas. He goes back to Mexico City. He said, hey, I shot General Walker, your worst enemy in the world, who might have been a worse enemy to them than even the president. Let me in. But he fails in that. So his mind gets going. He's got a job at the Texas School Book Depository. The motorcade route comes out 2 weeks beforehand. He's got a perfect seat. He's 88 yards away. He's got the means, and he's got the reason to do it. And that's really, truly what I believe. Now, did other people want him to do that? Did people help him do that? In 54 years of research, no one's ever been able to find an accomplice, right? And we'll never know what Oswald was going to do, but if you put 2 and 2 together and put the pieces of puzzle together, I think he was traveling back to Mexico City saying, I shot the President of the United States, folks. What more could I do to convince you? I mean, that's my take. I want you to have your own thought process on it. But you can see that he was a weird enough individual, right? Okay, we're going to have a little cake here, and we're going to end this whole thing tomorrow and tell you about Jack Ruby, because I want to see what your thoughts were if Jack Ruby was the man that purposely shot Oswald to silence him, or he was just a guy that was kind of goofy. Yeah, I'll tell you the story on him tomorrow, okay? I'll go get the cake.